In the bustling port city of Cyprus, Zeno was known far and wide, not just as a trader, but as one of the wealthiest men on the island. His fortunes were built on years of shrewd decision-making, navigating the treacherous seas and expanding his business empire. He sailed regularly between Phoenicia and Piraeus, carrying exotic goods and spices, becoming the envy of the other merchants. His home was a grand mansion, his life a spectacle of wealth and luxury. But one day, a storm unlike any Zeno had ever encountered swept through the seas with ferocity. His ship, laden with precious cargo, was caught in the violent waves. Zeno watched helplessly as the ship capsized, the thunderous roar of the ocean drowning out his cries. In a matter of moments, his life's work, all that he had painstakingly built, sank to the depths of the sea. His cargo was lost. His wealth vanished, and with it, his identity as a prosperous trader. As Zeno was rescued from the wreckage, drenched and broken, a deep, profound emptiness settled in. The world he had once known, the comforts, the security, the power, had slipped away. How could he respond to this devastation? The man who had once wielded his wealth like a shield against the world's uncertainties, now stood naked before life's capricious forces. The expected reactions, anger, rage, despair, coursed through his mind like an unstoppable flood. Was it fate? Was life playing a cruel joke on him? In that moment, he realized how much control he had falsely believed he had over his life. Yet amidst the chaos of his emotions, there was something unexpected, a flicker of stillness. Rather than giving in to bitterness, Zeno began to reflect deeply on his situation. His wealth had been stripped away, but what remained? Was it his fortune that had defined him? Or was it something deeper, something intangible? Could it be that life had not cheated him, but instead provided an opportunity for a profound transformation? As Zeno walked away from the wreckage and back to the streets of Cyprus, he found himself drawn to a small bookshop. There he stumbled upon a scroll, an ancient manuscript of Socratic teachings. It was as if the universe had guided him to this very moment. The teachings spoke to him with a clarity he had never known before. It was here, amidst his greatest loss, that Zeno first encountered philosophy. The idea was simple yet revolutionary. We cannot control what happens to us, but we can control how we react. Zeno began to see that his attachment to material wealth had been a source of his suffering. The external world, with its uncertainties and uncontrollable forces, had taken everything from him, but he still had his mind, his thoughts, his willpower. He could control how he responded to the storm that had ravaged his life. Zeno's transformation began not in his wealth, but in his mind. It was here, in the aftermath of what should have been his greatest failure, that Zeno found the seeds of a new life. Stoicism was born from his realization that true power did not lie in external wealth or possessions, but in one's ability to maintain inner peace amidst life's storms. But this was just the beginning. Zeno's journey would lead him not only to his own spiritual rebirth, but to the creation of a philosophy that would change the course of history. The storm had taken everything, but it had also given him everything. In his greatest loss, Zeno had found his true calling, one that would ripple through generations, teaching the world to rise above life's inevitable hardships, not by avoiding them, but by embracing them with unshakable calm. In the years following the storm, Zeno's life underwent a profound metamorphosis. The teachings of Socrates, which he had discovered in the small bookshop on that fateful day, ignited something within him. What had begun as a simple curiosity soon blossomed into a burning passion. Zeno spent hours each day poring over the scrolls, contemplating the deeper truths of existence. The more he learned, the more the world around him seemed to shift. For Zeno, the heart of Socratic philosophy was deceptively simple. We cannot control the events of life, but we can control how we respond to them. It was a truth so powerful, so liberating, that Zeno began to reshape his life around it. He rejected the material world's endless chase for wealth, power, and fleeting pleasure, and turned instead toward cultivating inner strength, wisdom, and virtue. Zeno was not alone in his search for meaning. The world around him was a tumultuous sea, much like the one that had claimed his ship. The political landscape in Greece and the broader Mediterranean was rife with corruption and turmoil. The wealthy elite, who had once been Zeno's peers, were entrenched in a system that perpetuated inequality and injustice. The masses, slaves, women, and commoners, were oppressed. their voices drowned out by those in power. But Zeno's philosophy was different. It was not reserved for the privileged few. It was for everyone. The Stoic doctrine held that wisdom, virtue, and peace of mind were available to all, regardless of status or birth. Zeno began teaching those who were often excluded from the halls of power, including slaves and women, about the virtues of self-control, resilience, and inner peace. To Zeno, the Stoic ideal was not a life of passive acceptance, but an active engagement with the world. Through rational thought and emotional discipline, he taught his followers that while they could not control the chaos of the world around them, they could master their inner world. By focusing on their thoughts, attitudes, and actions, they could find freedom in a world bound by fate. Zeno's teachings spread quickly. He gathered a small but devoted group of disciples who were drawn to the simplicity and depth of Stoicism. His followers came from all walks of life: slaves who had once known only cruelty, women whose voices had been silenced by tradition, and men whose lives had been marked by suffering. For the first time in history, a philosophy was being democratized in a way that transcended social divisions. But Zeno's ideas were not without opposition. The established power structures, those who thrived on inequality, saw Stoicism as a threat. What was this philosophy that preached the equality of all souls, the sovereignty of individual reason, and the freedom that lay in one's ability to choose their response to life's events? The ruling class feared a movement that could undermine the foundations of their control. For Zeno, the heart of Socratic philosophy was deceptively simple. We cannot control the events of life, but we can control how we respond to them. It was a truth so powerful, so liberating, that Zeno began to reshape his life around it. He rejected the material world's endless chase for wealth, power, and fleeting pleasure, and turned instead toward cultivating inner strength, wisdom, and virtue. Zeno was not alone in his search for meaning. The world around him was a tumultuous sea, much like the one that had claimed his ship. The political landscape in Greece and the broader Mediterranean was rife with corruption and turmoil. The wealthy elite, who had once been Zeno's peers, were entrenched in a system that perpetuated inequality and injustice. The masses, slaves, women, and commoners, were oppressed, their voices drowned out by those in power. But Zeno's philosophy was different. It was not reserved for the privileged few. It was for everyone. The Stoic doctrine held that wisdom, virtue, and peace of mind were available to all, regardless of status or birth. Zeno began teaching those who were often excluded from the halls of power, including slaves and women, about the virtues of self-control, resilience, and inner peace. To Zeno, the Stoic ideal was not a life of passive acceptance, but an active engagement with the world. Through rational thought and emotional discipline, he taught his followers that while they could not control the chaos of the world around them, they could master their inner world. By focusing on their thoughts, attitudes, and actions, they could find freedom in a world bound by fate. Zeno's teachings spread quickly. He gathered a small but devoted group of disciples who were drawn to the simplicity and depth of Stoicism. His followers came from all walks of life: slaves who had once known only cruelty, women whose voices had been silenced by tradition, and men whose lives had been marked by suffering. For the first time in history, a philosophy was being democratized in a way that transcended social divisions. But Zeno's ideas were not without opposition. The established power structures, those who thrived on inequality, saw Stoicism as a threat. What was this philosophy that preached the equality of all souls, the sovereignty of individual reason, and the freedom that lay in one's ability to choose their response to life's events? The ruling class feared a movement that could undermine the foundations of their control. Yet for every critic, there were hundreds of supporters. Zeno's message began to resonate with the oppressed, with those who had long been disenfranchised by society's rigid hierarchies. The teachings of Stoicism became a beacon of hope, not just for individuals seeking peace of mind, but for a society on the brink of transformation. Zeno's own identity, once so intricately tied to wealth and status, had been radically redefined. His riches, once his pride and joy, had been replaced by something far more valuable: wisdom, clarity of mind, and an unshakable sense of purpose. He had become a man of the people, a teacher of wisdom who showed that true wealth came not from material possessions, but from the cultivation of inner peace and virtue. Yet the twist in Zeno's journey was this: in teaching others, he was not only transforming their lives, but his own as well. The man who had once been defined by his success in business now found his greatest fulfillment in sharing his wisdom with the world. He realized that true leadership was not about wealth or power, but about the ability to inspire others to find their own strength and wisdom. As Zeno's teachings spread, the seeds of Stoicism began to take root in unexpected places. It wasn't just the wealthy who were drawn to Stoicism's promise of peace and freedom. It was the slaves, the women, the outcasts, and the disillusioned masses who saw in Stoicism not just a philosophy, but a way of life that could free them from the chains of their circumstances. Stoicism, once an abstract philosophy, had become a movement, one that transcended social class, gender, and background. Zeno had, in his quiet wisdom, turned the world upside down, showing that true power lay not in external circumstances, but in the ability to govern oneself in the face of life's unpredictable nature. As Zeno's teachings began to spread, so too did his personal philosophy, which emphasized more than just the cultivation of inner peace through rational thought. It also demanded physical and emotional resilience. Among the most important practices he adopted was one that would become a hallmark of Stoic training: voluntary discomfort. The concept was simple yet powerful. By deliberately choosing discomfort, one could develop an unwavering strength of character. Zeno believed that comfort bred complacency and that true fortitude came from enduring hardship willingly. It was a method that mirrored the core Stoic belief that life, at its heart, was uncontrollable and often brutal. But the ability to withstand suffering was not only a sign of wisdom, but the path to enlightenment itself. Zeno's first experiment with voluntary discomfort was a radical break from the luxurious lifestyle he had once known. He had spent his days in fine clothes, eating rich meals, and sleeping in soft beds. Now, he chose the cold stone floor of his humble apartment as his new resting place, refusing the comforts of a mattress. Each night, he lay on the hard surface, his body aching from the unfamiliar coldness. Yet he did not complain. In fact, he welcomed the discomfort, for it was a reminder of his inner resilience, a way to detach from the need for external comfort and seek strength within. But it was not just physical discomfort that Zeno sought. He challenged himself emotionally and psychologically as well. When faced with the frustrations and challenges of daily life, he would intentionally practice self-restraint. If a particularly difficult situation arose, an insult, a setback, a perceived injustice, Zeno would embrace it, refusing to let his emotions control him. Instead of reacting with anger or frustration, he would step back, observe his thoughts, and choose a response that was grounded in reason and self-mastery. Zeno's followers quickly noticed his unshakable demeanor. They saw how, despite his growing influence, he still subjected himself to these rigorous practices of discomfort. It became clear to them that Stoicism was not merely an intellectual exercise, it was a way of life, demanding consistent, everyday practice. Zeno did not ask them to follow a set of abstract principles. He demanded they live them through actions as well as thoughts. The twist came when Zeno began to realize something profound about his practice of voluntary discomfort. The more he chose to endure hardship, the more his understanding of life itself deepened. The discomfort no longer felt like a burden, it felt liberating. Zeno began to see that suffering, when willingly chosen, was not something to be avoided. Instead, it was a path to enlightenment. By accepting hardship, one could learn to rise above it, to remain unshaken in the face of adversity. In a moment of reflection, Zeno realized that his life had become a testament to this very truth. The storm that had claimed his fortune was the first great test of his resilience. Losing everything had been the ultimate discomfort, one that most would crumble under. Yet Zeno had endured it, and in doing so, had found a deeper sense of peace than he had ever known before. This moment of realization transformed him further, and he began teaching his followers that suffering, rather than being feared, should be embraced. It was through the endurance of discomfort that one found true joy, not the fleeting joy of external success, but the lasting joy that came from mastering oneself. Zeno's daily practices, once a personal exercise, now became a cornerstone of Stoic philosophy. He encouraged his followers to test themselves in small ways every day. Eat less than you want, walk further than necessary, sleep on the cold ground, endure the heat of the sun without complaint. These small discomforts, Zeno argued, would prepare the soul for the larger trials that life inevitably brought. By embracing discomfort, One developed the strength to face life's challenges without being thrown off course. Yet the dramatic element in this chapter lies not only in Zeno's personal transformation, but in the way he reframed suffering for his followers. To them, the exercise was not an endurance test for the body alone. It was a philosophical training for the soul. It was in this process of voluntary discomfort that Zeno's followers began to recognize the power they had over their own lives, even in the face of the most difficult circumstances. As the practice of voluntary discomfort spread, it became a core tenet of Stoicism. Followers found that it was not the absence of suffering that brought peace, it was the mastery over suffering. It was in the quiet moments of enduring hardship that the Stoic discovered their true strength. The suffering no longer felt like a punishment. It became the crucible in which their character was forged. For Zeno, this transformation was deeply personal. He had spent a lifetime chasing wealth and comfort, only to lose it all. But through Stoicism, he discovered something far more valuable, the ability to remain steadfast, calm and wise in the face of adversity. It was this very wisdom that he now shared with the world, teaching others that true joy was found not in the absence of hardship, but in the strength to endure it. As Zeno's influence spread, so too did the appeal of his teachings. His followers varied from the powerful elite to the lowliest of slaves, all drawn to the transformative potential of Stoicism. However, among them was one man whose life would dramatically shift through Zeno's guidance, Marcus. Marcus was young, full of ambition, and driven by an insatiable desire for success. He dreamed of climbing the ranks of business, acquiring wealth and enjoying the power that came with it. Yet for all his ambition, Marcus found himself perpetually frustrated. Every venture he attempted, every opportunity that arose, seemed to slip through his fingers at the last moment. Setbacks piled on top of setbacks, failed partnerships, poor investments, betrayals. For Marcus, it seemed that fate itself was conspiring against him. In the midst of his despair, Marcus came across Zeno, who was teaching a small group of followers in the marketplace. Zeno's calm demeanor struck him as odd, given the volatile times they lived in. The marketplace itself was a chaotic place, vendors shouting to sell their wares, disputes over goods and political unrest in the streets. Yet Zeno stood there, serene and composed, speaking to his followers about the nature of happiness, success, and failure. The contrast was undeniable. Marcus approached Zeno with the intensity of a man desperate for answers. "Master," he asked, "why does it seem as though everything I touch turns to failure? Why can't I find the success I strive for?" Zeno's eyes sparkled with understanding. He could see that Marcus's problem was not the lack of opportunity, but his perspective on life. Zeno smiled gently and responded, "Success, my young friend, is not about the outcome. It's about the effort. You have been focusing too much on what you cannot control, the results. The secret is in how you approach the effort itself. Reframe how you see the world, and you will begin to see yourself differently." This simple statement would change Marcus's life forever. Zeno explained that reframing, the ability to shift one's perspective, was the key to a Stoic life. The Stoics believed that while we could not control the external events that befall us, we could control how we responded to them. Our happiness and inner peace did not depend on achieving specific outcomes, but on our ability to accept and reframe our internal reactions. At first, Marcus found it difficult to understand. His entire life had been about pursuing external goals, each one seen as a stepping stone to his success. His identity was bound to his dreams of wealth, influence, and power. Without them, who was he? What was the point of anything? But Zeno patiently continued to guide him, sharing stories of great Stoics who had faced failure and hardship, but never lost their sense of purpose. Zeno spoke of Socrates, who was unjustly sentenced to death, yet met his fate with tranquility. He spoke of Diogenes, who lived in a barrel and considered material wealth meaningless. These men, despite their circumstances, were masters of their own minds because they reframed their challenges as opportunities for growth. Gradually, Marcus began to apply Zeno's teachings. He started by changing his mindset during the smallest of challenges. If a deal fell through, instead of feeling frustration, he would ask himself, "What can I learn from this? How can I improve from this setback?" Slowly, his constant anxiety and fear of failure began to fade. He learned to focus on the process rather than the results. The twist came when Marcus began to see that his own dissatisfaction wasn't the result of external failure. but his obsession with outcomes. In his quest for material success, he had neglected the richness of the journey. The deeper he went into Stoic thought, the more he realized that true success lay not in the attainment of external goals, but in the alignment of effort with virtue. As Marcus reframed his perspective, something remarkable happened. Success began to find him, but it was no longer the driving force in his life. He became more patient with setbacks, more creative in solving problems, and more open to opportunities that aligned with his values. He became a man who sought to improve his character rather than simply his fortunes. Yet the real change in Marcus was not just in his approach to business, but in his sense of self. His identity, once tied to external measures of success, shifted toward an internal understanding of who he was and what he valued. In reframing his worldview, Marcus discovered a peace he had never known, a peace that came not from achieving things, but from accepting life as it came and choosing how to respond. The dramatic element of this part lies in the profound realization that success, as Marcus had once defined it, was a fleeting, unreliable thing. But true fulfillment, the kind that Stoicism offered, came from within. Marcus's transformation is one of redefining what it means to win. The victory was not in the external accomplishments, but in his internal shift from a frustrated, driven man obsessed with outcomes to a fulfilled, self-assured Stoic who found peace in effort and virtue. In time, Marcus became not only a successful businessman, but a true Stoic, a living example of Zeno's teachings. He shared his newfound wisdom with others, inspiring a new generation to reframe their own lives, not by focusing on the fleeting nature of external success, but by cultivating inner resilience and peace. Years passed, and Zeno's Stoic philosophy grew beyond the realm of personal introspection. It began to seep into the fabric of society, rippling through both the elite circles of Rome and the humble corners of everyday life. What started as a philosophy of inner peace and self-mastery evolved into something far more powerful, a movement. By this point, Zeno had accumulated a diverse following: merchants, philosophers, soldiers, even slaves. His teachings transcended the barriers of class, wealth, and status. The idea that true power lay in one's ability to govern their inner world, rather than external circumstances, had struck a chord with many who were disillusioned with the instability of their lives. But the real transformation came when Zeno's philosophy, originally a personal guide, began to shift societal thinking at large. The movement grows. The turning point came when Zeno's followers, who had once been individuals seeking personal solace, began to see the broader implications of Stoicism. The principles of virtue, rationality, and justice that Stoicism upheld became the foundation for an ethical society. Zeno's message that all people, regardless of social rank, had access to wisdom and virtue, began to resonate with those on the margins of society. One of the most revolutionary aspects of Zeno's philosophy was its appeal to the oppressed. Slaves, often treated as mere property, found in Stoicism a path to reclaiming their dignity. Women, for whom intellectual pursuits were largely closed off, found Zeno's teachings empowering. They were invited to study philosophy, to engage in deep thought, and to see themselves as equal participants in the moral life. In a society that largely viewed them as second-class citizens, the Stoic belief in the power of inner freedom became a revolutionary act. Zeno's philosophy was not just about personal growth, it was about transforming the very structures of society. Zeno had always believed in the idea that we are all citizens of the world, and this belief began to echo through his followers' words and deeds. It wasn't just the Roman elites who were listening to him anymore. It was the common folk, the soldiers, the workers, and even the slaves. They saw that Stoicism offered them not just a way to endure the hardships of life, but a way to reshape the world itself. The revolution unfolds. The political and social turbulence of the time created fertile ground for change. Rome, with its vast empire and immense power, was also a place of extreme inequality and injustice. The rich grew ever wealthier, while the poor languished in poverty and slavery. The ruling class was rife with corruption, and injustice was rampant in the streets. Amidst this chaos, Zeno's Stoicism offered a radically different vision. Stoicism, as interpreted by Zeno's followers, emphasized justice and the inherent dignity of every human being, regardless of their social standing. A new generation of thinkers, activists, and leaders began to rise up, guided by the Stoic belief in the equality of all people before nature's law. These men and women, inspired by Stoicism, began to challenge the entrenched systems of power. One of the most remarkable moments in this unfolding revolution came when Zeno's teachings reached the Roman Senate, once composed only of the elite. The Senate was now faced with the question of whether their power could be justified by virtue alone. Lucius, a senator who had long struggled with the corruption of his position, began to advocate for laws that would ensure greater fairness for the oppressed. He argued that true leadership required virtue, and that no man could claim leadership over another without a deep commitment to justice. At first, Lucius was met with skepticism. The ruling class was resistant to the idea of relinquishing power or privileges. But the influence of Stoicism began to spread in subtle ways. Senators who had once dismissed the plight of the poor were now considering their moral duty to protect the less fortunate. Philosophers, students, and common citizens gathered in the streets to demand change, calling for a society that embraced Stoic ideals of equality and justice. Zeno's followers were no longer just followers, they were agents of change. The transformation. The culmination of this unlikely revolution occurred when the high Stoic ideals of justice and virtue began to shape public policy. Zeno's philosophy became the moral backbone of a growing movement for social justice. The once rigidly hierarchical Roman society started to evolve, albeit slowly, into a more equitable system, where the rights of all people were considered sacred. The dramatic twist came when Zeno's teachings, originally seen as a way to manage personal hardship, were now seen as a blueprint for social transformation. Stoicism's emphasis on self-mastery, wisdom, and virtue had gradually shifted from an inward pursuit to an outwardly directed force for societal change. The lasting legacy. But the most surprising twist lay in the way. Stoicism united people from all walks of life, from the emperor to the slave, from the wealthy to the oppressed. Zeno's philosophy became not just a personal doctrine but a unifying force. It was a call to arms for human dignity, urging individuals to look beyond their personal struggles and see themselves as part of a greater whole. In the end, Zeno's legacy was not only the cultivation of individual resilience, but the creation of a movement that challenged the very foundations of power and privilege. His teachings had transformed him from a wealthy merchant to a spiritual guide, and ultimately they transformed the world around him. What began as a personal philosophy became a revolution, a new way of living, where the pursuit of virtue, justice, and inner peace reshaped society. Zeno's final words to his followers echoed the idea that had driven his life. We are all citizens of the world, and the world belongs to no one but those who live justly. The revolution, though imperfect, had begun. Stoicism had evolved from a personal tool of survival to a societal force that rippled through generations, reshaping not only individuals but entire civilizations. Zeno, the once wealthy trader who had lost everything, had gained more than he could ever have imagined. He had changed the world,